Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. This is episode number 14 of season 9. Today is Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, all right, you guys, last time I talked to you, I was wrapping up the month of July. So it's already August as I'm recording. I cannot believe summer is literally just a few weeks away from ending. So I'm trying to enjoy every last drop of sunshine I possibly can. I hope all of you guys are as well. Now, all right, you guys, let's try and get right into another episode today. There is yet another rule that just dropped. It's a final rule for hospice for calendar year 2024. And in my compliance tips and recommendations today, in my Trusty Tip, I'm going to be getting into the latest CBR. Once again, it was pushed right until the end of July, so I couldn't talk about it on my last week's episode, as I mentioned on that episode, but I will talk about it today. And it is the Comparative Billing Report number 7 that's been issued on subsequent annual wellness visits. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and round out today's episode and close it out with Spark in a remarkable quote on success by John D. Rockefeller. If you guys have checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and our valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve your coding accuracy as you help all your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, and definitely start following this podcast on Spotify and show me your support there as well. I would really, really love to see it. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips and my compliance recommendations based on my over 13 years of experience in front office, in back end, in coding, and in billing for multi-specialty physicians, in compliance, and in auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. Today's episode is sponsored by Advanced Coding Services, a leading medical billing and medical coding school in the United States. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned professional, our training equips you with the tools and support you need to advance your career. Our medical billing and coding school meets your needs worldwide online or in person with one-on-one support throughout your training. We are committed to helping our alumni and credentialed medical community in keeping up their certifications by offering various avenues for acquiring your continuing education units. In addition to our Mastering the Business of Medicine retreats offered several times throughout the year in different parts of the country, we now offer memberships. You can conveniently earn your CEUs by attending our exclusive members-only webinars. Since our aim is to nurture and grow the careers of individuals who work in the business of medicine, we call our member area the Apple Orchard. Advanced Coding Services, educate, nurture, inspire, reaching back with a hand up. So let's get into Newsworthy. Now, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, that's our CMS, released their very own fact sheet on July 28th, 2023, and they issued a final rule under CMS 1787F that updates Medicare hospice payments, as well as the aggregate cap amount for fiscal year 2024, in accordance with existing statutory and regulatory requirements. Now, CMS is publishing this final rule in accordance with the legal requirements to update Medicare payment policies for hospices on an annual basis. Now, the fact sheet discusses the major provisions of the final rule, including the annual update to hospice payments and the aggregate cap amount for fiscal year 2024. It also dives into and discusses comments received regarding information related to the provision of higher levels of hospice care and spending patterns for non-hospice services provided during the election of the hospice benefit. Also included is the ownership transparency, as well as equipping patients and caregivers with information to inform hospice selection, as well as ways to examine health equity under the hospice benefit. Now, this final rule also finalizes conforming regulation text changes that are related to the expiration of the COVID-19 public health emergency. Now, importantly, this rule is taking several important steps as part of CMS's efforts to closely examine the hospice industry because they have been seeing increasing concerns about fraud, waste, and abuse in this space. Now, furthering these efforts, this final rule finalizes CMS's proposal that physicians who certify patient eligibility for hospice services must be enrolled in Medicare or validly opted out as a prerequisite for payment for the hospice period of care in question. Now, CMS's certifying physician enrollment requirement is part of a larger effort by CMS to address the greater hospice fraud, waste, and abuse that they've been seeing among these types of providers. Now, there are also 101 PDF pages for you to review, published today on August 2nd, 2023 in the Federal Register. So take the time and read those pages. Now, I wanted to go ahead and share some of the highlights I found from those 101 pages. Now, hospice providers will see an increase in reimbursement by 3.1% for fiscal year 2024. The final rule also outlines payment reductions as well if certain required quality reporting data are not submitted to Medicare. Also, physicians who certify patient eligibility for hospice services must be enrolled in Medicare or have validly opted out. But in response to concerns that were raised by public comments, CMS will not be implementing or enforcing this requirement until May 1st, 2024, to give those unenrolled and those non-opted out physicians more time to enroll in or opt out of the Medicare program. Now, the final rule addresses hospice transparency. This is a very good thing because patients and caregivers are provided with better, detailed information for informed hospice selection and health equity. Now, the final rule also finalizes regulation text changes related to the expiration of the COVID-19 public health emergency, the PHE. Specifically the provision of telehealth services for routine home care and for the use of telecommunications technology for the face-to-face encounter by a hospice physician or hospice nurse practitioner for the sole purpose of hospice recertification through December 31st, 2024. And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. So in today's compliance tip, let's get into the latest comparative billing report on subsequent annual wellness visits. Now this is CBR number 202307. That's right, it is the 7th CBR for the year for 2023. Now, CMS will be issuing a comparative billing report, a CBR, to rendering providers that submitted claims to Medicare Part B for subsequent AWVs or annual wellness visits. Now, this CBR number 202307 focuses on Medicare Part B claims submitted with Healthcare Common Procedure Code System, or HCPCS code G0439, as well as claims submitted with Current Procedural Terminology codes, or CPT codes, for evaluation and management services. Those are our E&M codes 99211 through 99215. Now, this analysis involves claims submitted with modifier 95 as well, which is for synchronous telemedicine services rendered via a real-time interactive audio and video telecommunications system, as well as with claims with place of service codes of 02, which is for telehealth provided other than in a patient's home, or for place of service code 10, which is for telehealth provided in the patient's home. Now, the CBR analysis was based on claims extracted from the Integrated Data Repository which was based on the latest version of claims available on June 9th, 2023. Now, the analysis includes paid claims with dates of service from March 1st, 2022 through February 28th of 2023. The 2022 Medicare Fee-for-Service Supplemental Improper Payment Data Report reflects a projected improper payment rate of 24.7% for personalized prevention plan services for subsequent annual wellness visits. Again, that's with that HCPCS code G0439, which represents over $231 million in projected improper payments. Now, after reviewing and researching the improper payment rate, this particular CBR was created to analyze the possible threat to the Medicare Trust Fund associated with subsequent AWVs. Now, the expectation is that our rendering providers of annual wellness visits, those AWVs, in addition to our E&M services, those evaluation and management services, will maintain proper coding documentation and confirm the appropriate use of HCPCS and CPT codes. Now, the criteria for receiving this CBR are that the provider, number one, was found to be significantly higher compared to either state or national percentages in the metric calculations, which means they had to be greater than or equal to the 90th percentile. And number two, that provider must have had at least 180 patients with claims for subsequent AWVs. And finally, third, that provider had to have had at least $24,000 in total allowed charges. So let's get into the HCPCS and CPT codes in the spotlight here. So HCPCS code G0439 is for annual wellness visit, and it includes a personalized prevention plan of service, subsequent visit. And then, of course, our CPT codes for the E&M 99211 through 99215 is for office or other outpatient visit for the evaluation and management of an established patient that may not require the presence of a physician or other qualified healthcare professional, levels 1 through 5. Now, the metrics here. This report is an analysis of 3 metrics. The first being percentage of the provider's claims that have a subsequent AWV claim line. Number 2, it will analyze the percentage of the provider's subsequent AWV claim lines performed by telehealth. And then finally, third, the percentage of subsequent AWV claims where an E&M visit is billed for the same patient on the same date of service. Now, this particular CBR analysis focuses on rendering providers that submitted claims for subsequent AWV using that HCPCS code G0439. Now, statistics were calculated for each provider, all providers in the state, as well as all providers in the nation. Now, there are exactly 147,630 rendering providers nationwide that have submitted Medicare Part B claims for subsequent AWVs. Now, the total allowed charges for these claims were over $1.23 billion during the analysis timeframe. So remember, the subsequent annual wellness visit services vulnerability, right? According to that 2022 Medicare Fee-for-Service Supplemental Improper Payment Data Report, the improper payment rate projected is 24.7% for personalized prevention plan services for that subsequent visit HCPCS code G0439 for annual wellness visits, which represents, again, over $231 million in projected improper payments. Although, as I read deep into this particular CBR, once again, just as inside the previous one on lower endoscopy, that CBR number 6, it provides absolutely no details on the percent of incorrect coding and or the percent of insufficient documentation or lack of medical necessity. This CBR provides none of those details. But of course, the desired behavior here for subsequent annual wellness visit services is, of course, to protect the Medicare Trust Fund. It's also to increase our providers' awareness about potential improper payments for these subsequent AWV types of services. It's also meant to support our providers' internal compliance processes, as well as it encourages the self-audit process for compliance. Now, it's critical to understand that a CBR does not indicate that you're going to get an official audit. Although please be mindful, because this phrase is directly coming from the MACs that issue the CBRs. So take that again with plenty of grains of salt, because more directly consider this to be your notice, your warning that you are being looked at closely. So the value of the CBR to providers is that it does serve as a tool to look at their billing patterns as compared to their peers in their state as well as across the nation. Now, the value also includes the facts that specific coding guidelines and billing information will be detailed. And the CBR informs providers whose billing patterns differ from those of their peers, and that will be found in the letter that comes to you in the mail. Now, my best practice recommendations always include the fact that you should be reviewing those definitions of HCPCS codes as well as those applicable CPT codes to ensure correct code assignment. Because if you perform regular internal reviews of documentation alongside that code selection, you can ensure accuracy and compliance. These two steps alone can help reduce the possibility of improper payments. Remember, again, we have no details on how much is attributed to insufficient documentation or incorrect coding. So remember, the CBR should have all of us providing subsequent annual wellness visit services really buckle down and self-audit, whether we receive this CBR in the mail or not. It's a great time to dive deeper into your own data, help yourself, and help the Medicare Trust Fund at the same time. You should be paying attention to what you're sending out the door. Is it really in compliance? Stay ahead of the curve and avoid receiving post-payment audits from the payers down the road. It's fundamental, if you have Medicare as a payer, to keep your eye on correct and compliant coding and billing practices and make sure that you are adhering to all of them. A better, smarter approach is one that's proactive and starts by painting a clear, rich, and vibrant medical picture the first time, so your certified medical coder can then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, I focus Season 9 Spark on success. I want this 9th season Spark to be filled with our world's thought leaders, writers, artists, philosophers, everyone who inspires the need for success in all we strive to do. So, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from John D. Rockefeller. If you want to succeed, you should strike out on new paths rather than travel the worn paths of accepted success. Absolutely true, right? I think this is an amazing quote that reminds us that our creativity, ingenuity, and courage to be different really set the stage for success. I think this quote inspires us to take different paths. These paths are the ones that can lead to the best kinds of success. I'm happy John D. Rockefeller's spark still shines on in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. And as always, I appreciate you all diving into today with me. If you want more information from me, please go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Now, in my final note today, I hope this month of August is abundant for all of you. Just enjoy summer for as long as we have it. And please be mindful, continue to carve that special time out for yourselves so you avoid stress and you avoid burnout. I wish you guys all an amazing, incredible, happy week ahead. Thank you guys so much for listening in on today's episode. And I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.